Okay. So let me discuss some residual issues about markets and then move on to the next topic, hopefully in the second half of today's lecture. So the next topic is going to be choice theory and consumer behavior. We'll take a more detailed, more general look at behavior of households or consumers on one side and firms on the other side, right? For the purpose of this analysis in the first topic, as you saw, we made some strong special assumptions, and we didn't dig very deep into the behavior of these two sides of the market. That's what we're going to do next. But before that, let me talk about a few issues which are kind of broader philosophical issues about the role of markets and welfare. Struggle to manage these various windows, so let me move to this side. And okay, so let me talk briefly about a book by the philosopher Michael Sandel, which came out some years ago, 2012 to be precise. And Sandel launches quite a criticism against, shall we say, a culture of market reliance. He's very critical of the United States in this respect, but also sort of global trends. So Sandel is asking the question, should everything be monetized and exchanged through a market? Or should there be ethical and moral limits to what can be bought and sold through markets? So in Sandel's book, there's an exotic range of examples, many of them taken from America, but not exclusively so, of transactions or marketized exchanges, which could make many people uncomfortable. So what shouldn't be for sale, or what cannot be for sale? Two different questions, but related questions. There's some obvious answers, right? Friendship, love, respect, admiration, these are difficult to buy and sell. You know, I can put out an ad saying, I don't have any friends, I need a friend, please apply. You know, anybody who becomes a friend, I'll pay them 20,000 rupees a month. And I can get applications and I can appoint friends. Will they be true friends? Because the very nature of friendship or any of these other things involves voluntary participation, that somebody cannot be my friend for money. Now, moving beyond all of that, you know, we know of markets that exist in the real world, which we consider problematic. The law tries to regulate, ban, abolish, and so on. So we have child labor, sweatshop labor, prostitution, organ sales, right? There are black markets, underground markets for many of these things. And there's always a struggle that society has with these things. We can, you know, debate these questions. We don't have to sort of take it as axiomatic that none of these markets should exist. And people have debated the issue. For example, organ markets, right? That poor people often will sell their kidney for a price which is good for them. But most of us feel queasy about it. But on the other hand, there's huge shortage of organs for organ transplant. Like people who need kidney transplants, for example, often don't survive the wait. And even those who get it may have to wait for years. Now, here are some more funny examples in Sandel's book. In some Texas schools, they started a system of paying children if they read a book. Okay, so the child claims to have read a book, will probably give a test, ask a few questions to make sure that the child has read the book, and then the child gets some money. Um, this is supposedly to encourage reading. Um, if you think of reading books as a supply curve, you offer a higher price, you get more supply. Children read more books. Seems like a smart solution to some people, but other people will say that, well, it does not encourage reading for its own sake. So children may be reading more books now when they're in class 5, but in the longer run, over the lifetime, they won't, because they won't learn that reading a book is a reward for its own sake. So reading habits may actually deteriorate. So you can go through this list. There are funny ones. There are websites where you can buy customized apologies, wedding toasts. In the West, there's a tradition of, at your friend's wedding, if you're the best man or something, you have to give a funny speech. And some people don't feel up to it. They get nervous and stressed out. And there are websites where they can go and put in some information about their friend, and they will write your speech for you. Sandel is saying that this is not a genuine item. These are things that cannot be bought and sold. When the Pope visited America, the previous Pope, Pope Francis, one of the earlier popes, there were midnight masses that he held, and the Vatican didn't charge for the tickets. They gave the tickets for free, but there cropped up a huge black market for tickets to the Sunday Mass. So people who are willing to pay a lot to go to heaven, I guess. So there was scalping for these tickets, and Sandel is very disturbed by that. For many services, for example, for medical services, there are multiple lanes that are created. There are multiple lanes. There's a fast lane and there's a slow lane. So if you pay a big subscription fee to the hospital or the hospital chain, then if you fall sick and need treatment, you can go and they'll fast track you. You get the treatment earlier. Whereas if you're one of the ordinary patients, then you go and wait much longer to get treated. You get treated, but there's a long waiting time. So obviously the rich and the privileged can access the fast lane by paying handsome amounts, and the more ordinary people stand in queue. Okay. So Sandel is very bothered by all of this. Yes. Shishir, do you have a question?
Yes, sir, I did. My main question was that most of the things that seem to be problematic in these cases is that they amplify the inequality of a society, of a situation.
Yes,
basically.
I'm coming to that. That's the next slide. Yes, I'll discuss that. So you see, look at these range of examples. There are other examples. For example, there are some highways where you have a fast lane. And so to get on the fast lane, you need to pay a toll. Yeah. You can avoid the toll and take the other lanes, which are slower, which are more clogged up. There's more traffic, of course, because they're cheap or free. But there's a fast lane there. And in some cases, the toll for the fast lane is sort of updated by the minute, depending on how much traffic is coming in, right? So they have AI algorithms, whatever. They have constant data feed, how much traffic is coming in, and they raise or lower the toll. So it's markets taken to a very sophisticated degree. And Sandel again says, no, that's not good. Another example, before I get to the point, sports, right? In sports, often you have these corporate boxes, right? They're wonderful. I've been once in the Eden Gardens. So you have this air-conditioned box. You have comfortable, sofas and chairs, and you have a big screen TV. Because whenever I go to the ground to watch a cricket match, a batsman gets out, and I'm always looking around instinctively for the replay. Right? That what happened? Okay. Now you can do that. You can have the best of both worlds in these corporate boxes. There's a TV screen where you see the replay, but you can also watch live and soak in the atmosphere of the ground. But then there are these seats for the ordinary Joe and Jane, where sitting on cement seats or whatever, plastic bucket seats, and exposed to the elements. So Sandel is saying that, look, sports is something which unites people, right? It is not just a straightforward question of consuming a performance, an athletic or sporting performance. The fact that you're sitting with other sports fans and enjoying the game and whooping and hollering and cheering and getting dejected, there is a bonding which comes with that, with your fellow citizens and fellow fans. And that is lost when you create these tiers, these hierarchies of these, fancy boxes where the privileged fans sit and they don't rub shoulders with the ordinary folks. So Sandel says that markets can be useful. They can serve a purpose in many ways for many goods and services, but we have carried it too far. He says that especially for America, he says that it has become it has become a market society, that society has become subservient to markets. I'm a messenger here. I'm not necessarily endorsing the view to the fullest extent, but I'm channeling it. It is a critique coming from a philosopher, which I think we need to pay some attention to. Okay, now, if you read through the book and you kind of collect together his main points and put it succinctly, what is he saying? He has 2 points of criticism, essentially. One is inequality, and the other can be called corruption. The inequality point is that, if some good or service, like healthcare, for example, is left to the market entirely, then whoever has more resources will typically end up getting priority. So price-based allocations create unequal access if the income distribution is unequal. So if you have a lot of inequality in the income distribution, it will become reflected in access to any good which is allocated through the price system, obviously. Yeah. Alternatives are rations or queues. When you have lotteries or queues, you have to stand in line. That gives rich and poor a more equal shot at getting the good or service, or getting it quickly, and so on. And Sandel says that, look, if we are talking about fancy smartphones or luxury yachts or private jets, it's okay, fine. Those things are unequally distributed in society. But if you're talking of, let's say, healthcare or education, then if there's a great inequality in access to these things, that's, to most people, would be ethically distasteful, right? We don't want a society where the inequality of the income distribution is reflected in every domain. He says there's something problematic about that. So you can talk about this, as a domain-specific inequality aversion. We are averse to inequality in general to some degree, but in particular domains, we may be more averse to inequality. So if you have completely price-based healthcare to the private market, then you may have a situation where poor people who badly need, who have clogged heart arteries and badly need bypass surgery, versus somebody rich who doesn't like his face or nose and wants to do plastic surgery. So the healthcare resources may prioritize the person needing plastic surgery over the person needing a heart bypass operation very urgently. So Sandel says that's a ethically abhorrent state of affairs. Okay, what is the other point? The other point is a little more novel. Well, I mean, in the economics literature, you find a lot of it. It may be called corruption, and it says that paying for some goods and services diminish their value. Okay, if it's a physical object, you know, if it's bread in the market and bread has suddenly become scarce because of some bakeries being hit by weather shock, whatever, then the price of bread in the market rises, but it doesn't change the quality of the bread. It's the same white sandwich bread or multigrain bread. It doesn't miraculously, because the price has risen, it has no connection to the nature and quality of the bread that we are buying. But in certain other things, especially with services and stuff like that, a rising price may actually affect the quality of the transaction. So I'm going to illustrate that with a couple of examples. Shohan, you have a question?
Yes, sir. I don't see how queues resolve the problem of inequality, because, sir, in that case, the differentiating factor doesn't become rich and poor. It becomes those who can afford to stand in the line and those who can't. So then it can be physical factors. So people are just built different. So this is the thing, like, we may resolve financial inequality, but there's still inequalities in so many different ways. So is it actually possible to completely resolve this problem as long as people are just different by nature?
Good point. Instead of the price system, price-based allocation, if we have queues or lotteries, to take the cleanest example, think of lotteries, right? Whoever wants the good or service puts in an application, and we draw lots to decide who'll get it. That is going to be equitable, right? You're right about queues, because queues require time investment instead of monetary investments. And some people may be better placed to make the time investment. It may be the poor, but sometimes it may be the rich. They may pay people to stand in line for them, and that happens. And Sandel has examples to that effect. So yeah, but the larger point is, to contrast with the price system, the cleanest example is lotteries. Point A. Point B, the larger point here is that what Sandel is saying is that we need to consider seriously non-price allocation mechanisms, and then which one you like better would depend on the context. Yes. I don't have time to delve very deep into it. In my optional institutions course in the second year, and forgive me for putting in a plug, never waste an opportunity for some publicity and advertisement.
Rations or queues give poor and equal.
Suraj, are you asking a question?
No.
Okay, so in the second year course, I get into some of these issues in a little more detail. But the point is that, let me just say that Sandel, my reaction to Sandel's work is that he is very good at diagnosing some problems and raising some questions, and because he's a philosopher, right? He thinks about the ethical aspects of it, and that's his comparative advantage. But he's a little naive on economic solutions. All right. There's very interesting work in economics. Che and Gale, for example, have papers which I like a lot, which essentially say that often if you're worried about distribution and so on, maybe the right allocation system is a combination of price and lotteries. Maybe some part of it you reserve and give it to the highest bidder, and some part to lotteries. But that goes against the grain of some other examples which Sandel is using, like the sports stadium, or the way we have in our trains, right? Some compartments are AC two-tier, whatever, AC first class, and the upper middle class and the rich travel in those. Ticket prices are much higher. And then you have these crowded general compartments, third class, right? But there is one advantage of that, which is that, you can use that system to cross-subsidize the rich paying extra above cost, and that goes towards giving subsidized prices for the poor in crowded general compartments. So as far as the intricate economics is concerned, Sandel is a little, I think, out of his depth, in my opinion. But I'm just touching upon some of the broad points he has made. I will throw in some of these references in the website. I'm looking up these references, and I'll give you links to that. So any of you who's interested in these issues can read further. Yes. Okay, let me tell you about this little experiment, and some of you may have heard about this or read about this. This is an illustration of the corruption point that we're talking about. So there were these child daycares in Israel, and the study was based on that. And it's basically an RCT, a randomized control trial, which, as you know, has certain advantages. Namely that since, you take care of reverse causality, endogeneity, and so on. So there were 10 daycare centers which were part of the study. They were observed over 20 weeks in Haifa, Israel. All of these daycare centers were having this problem that, parents were coming late to pick up their children. So they're supposed to, it gets over at 4, they're coming at 4:35. And so the staff had to wait extra time, and that was an inconvenience. And so they, in order to discourage this kind of late coming, some of them introduced penalties. So fines were introduced for late coming parents in a randomly chosen subset of these daycare centers. And that's key. The randomization is like in medical trials, you have to randomly select some patients and give them the medicine. Another control group, randomly chosen, does not get the medicine, and you see the difference. If you allow people to choose whether they want to take the medicine or not, then you have a self-selection problem, which will bias your results and comparison. So it was all kosher and properly set up. Yes. So in the first 4 weeks, none of these 10 daycare centers had any fines. In some weeks in the middle, 5 and 6, the treatment group, 6 centers which were chosen to introduce fines, they levied these fines, right? This is about $7 US. And the control group, the 4 other centers, they had no fine even in the intermediate week. So these guys had no fines ever throughout the 20 weeks of study. These guys had fines for some weeks in the middle, but not before and not after. All right, so what is the finding? The finding is this. These are averages for the 2 groups, treatment and control. Black is the treatment group where fines were introduced, remember, on week 5. So before week 5, they're moving similarly, right? Close enough. After week 5, the daycare centers where fines were introduced, the rate of late coming shot up, more than doubled actually, right? Previously, it was like about 10 cases of late arrivals. Now it's double of that. And more interestingly, even after the fines are withdrawn, it remains high. It doesn't come down. So 2 very striking features in the data here. The effect of fines is counterproductive. All right. You could think of the fine as a prize. And so previously the price was 0, right? Coming late didn't cost anything. You could come late at a 0 price. You could buy extra hour to pick up your child at a 0 price. Now you can do so, but at a price. It costs you. So if demand curves are downward sloping, then the graph should have been in the opposite direction. And moreover, when the fines are withdrawn, the price goes back to zero. Why does it remain stuck at this high level? Mystery. Here's another example. There was a very nice public debate in the 1970s. So the British sociologist Richard Titmuss wrote a book in 1971 where he launched a serious criticism of the American blood, what American hospitals did to procure blood for transfusions, right? The British system was purely voluntary. It was illegal to give blood for money. You could go and volunteer to give blood, and they'll run some medical tests on you and see that you're fit to do so and don't have diseases, and then they'll take it from you. In America, it was a hybrid system. You could voluntarily give blood for free, but you could also go and sell it to hospitals at a price. And Titmuss said that it performed worse in America. Now, two famous economists jumped into this debate. One was Kenneth Arrow, the other was Robert Solow. They made 2 points. One is data, the other is theory. The data-related point is that obviously this is a very unsophisticated, uncontrolled experiment. Britain and America are different in so many respects. So if the American system performed worse, there was less blood that was available, more shortages, more wastage, etc., etc., which is true in the data, but that could be due to countless other factors, right? So the basis of our multivariate regressions is that we need to control for other factors which may be causing a certain difference. So that was their sort of empirical point, but the theoretical point is that, look, if you pay zero, it's not that everybody is selfish and supply will be zero. There are generous people who want to help their fellow human beings, and they'll still give blood at a zero price. But if the price is positive, supply curves are positively sloped. Why will blood donation go down or blood availability go down? The generous people should still give blood, but some of the less generous people may now give it for money. So we should have more blood, not less. And then others jumped in. The famous philosopher Peter Singer also wrote a rebound. So there's a very interesting set of exchanges in mostly in the journal called Philosophy and Public Affairs. All right, but let's see, okay, what here's Peter Singer in his article responds to Solow and Arrow. One of the things, if you read these articles, and they're non-technical, they're written in plain English, you see how there's a strong intellectual debate and disagreement with great grace and respect for each other. So that's exemplary, and that's a quality which in these very ideologically polarized times we don't often see. Peter Singer, among other things, gave this quotation from an interview with a woman in Britain who donated blood for free in a hospital and was coming out, and was some journalist asked her, why did you do this? And she said that, look, 6 months ago, I was seriously ill in the hospital. There was mortal risk, and I got good health care. In particular, I needed a lot of blood, and blood was available for free in the hospital. I wasn't charged. And obviously that blood came from some stranger whose good-heartedness helped me. And now I feel an obligation to return this favor to society. Now that I'm healed, cured, and healthy, I need to give blood so that it can go towards helping somebody sick, just as I was on the beneficiary side 6 months back. Now I need to pay back that debt, if you will, to society. That's why I'm giving blood. And Peter Singer said that, look, if you pay for receiving as well as giving blood, then this moral obligation disappears. So I'm sick, I go to the hospital, I receive a lot of blood, I have paid for it. It's an item on my medical bill, and the hospital bought it from somebody. So I don't feel an obligation. I got blood, yes, it was helpful, but I paid. So I won't go back there after I'm cured to return the favor. So this, again, is related, perhaps. I mean, you can trace it to the concept of the categorical imperative that I talked about, or other ideas of reciprocity in ethics, etc. Now, what happens in reality? Are there more reliable data where we can look at this? I'll come to questions in just a while. So there's this nice paper from 2008, Maelstrom and Johansson. They said, okay, let's try this out. So they carried out this, again, randomized control trial in this hospital, this teaching hospital in Sweden. And it was done on undergraduate students or healthy young adults. The volunteers were put in 3 groups or 3 treatments. So the first group were asked, do you want to give blood? There's a blood camp we've opened. No rewards, right? Purely voluntary. Treatment 2 is the group who would get paid about $7 for if they gave blood, right? So they were offered a price. And the third group was somewhere in between. The third group said that they were given the offer that if they give blood, they won't be given money into their wallet, but they'll be given $7 to donate to charity. So they can specify a charity and the organizers will give the money to that charity. Okay. Now, notice that in terms of a price, if you will, price is 0 in treatment 1, somewhat positive in treatment 3, and somewhat even higher in treatment 2. Why? Because under treatment 2, you still have the option of donating the money to charity. They give it to you, right? So you can either buy a cappuccino with it, or you can donate it to charity, your choice. So you have more choices. So obviously, in some sense, then you're receiving a better price as far as treatment 2 is concerned compared to treatment 3. Anyway, they were drawn from 3 disciplines, etc. Let's look at what they found. Here are the 3 treatments. This is treatment 1, no payment. That group, what was the percentage of the subjects who said yes to the blood donation request? This is treatment 2, where the payment goes to charity for sure. And this is treatment 3, where you are just paid in cash and you can do whatever you want with that money. And it's broken up by gender. The black bar is for the women and the white is for the men. So for the men, so, our basic demand and supply theory would say that the second group gets the cash payment. The third group is compulsorily has to give it to charity, specify a charity. So simple textbook demand theory says that the lowest contribution will be in the first treatment, followed by the third treatment, followed by the middle one, the second one. For men, it's roughly that way, although not much of a difference. But for the women, you see this when cash is offered, instead of going up, the percentage of blood donors radically falls. You can see that in the voluntary case, again, there's a gender difference. I mean, women are much more generous in their behavior in giving blood, 50% as opposed to 30%. For this group, I'm not generalizing. So this is the unexpected and bizarre observation, right? When the price offered is better, instead of 0, it's $7. Why does it fall so severely? There's a supply curve which does not act in expected ways at all, right? So this adds to the mystery that we saw in the daycare experiment. Now, there are other similar papers, and again, in my second year optional course, I delve more into this, I talk about two papers, theoretical papers by Benabou and Tirole, which are inspired by these observations. And broadly speaking, the stories are of the following kind. Or, okay, let me pause here, get a few questions, and then I'll tell you in a nutshell what some of the explanations are. Nilava.
So when it comes to markets of blood or human organs, are we extending the idea of private property to over human parts also?
Well, depends on what you mean by private property. Okay, if you mean that, the law gives a lot of autonomy to individuals, right? The right to privacy, your right to sort of, your body parts, that is guaranteed. But the question is it also giving the right to sell it off? The law is surely giving your kidney. I mean, it can come and use eminent domain and take away your house, right? Most countries have eminent domain laws which allow that. Take away your house against compensation, of course, but your rights to retain your house for yourself is not absolute, it's limited. But your right to your body organs is absolute. So in that sense, this is, as strong property rights as you can expect. But the question which is being debated here is not whether you have a right to your kidney, but whether you have a right to sell your kidney. Whether it can be, you can treat it as a commercial object. There, you have much stronger rights to your house, right? You could sell your house, no question. But selling your kidney becomes problematic. So in terms of owning your kidney and nobody, even the state, being able to take away your kidney, you have stronger rights. But in terms of selling it, you have stronger rights over your house.
So if we really had a market and we had the institution for at least selling or exchanging these body parts, then our body parts would actually be a form of capital that we hold.
No. Let's be precise, right? Let's not use terms which have connotations, but the meaning is not well defined. You asked me about,
So I asked you about private property.
Private property. So that's my answer is that, yes, if you think about how, in most countries, what the prevalent legal situation is, in one sense, in terms of, your right to own it, and it is, I mean, call it whatever, private property, but, it's a very strong right in terms of ownership, but it's a very weak right and often no right to sell it. So in that sense, if you compare your kidney with your house, it's not easily comparable. It depends on the sense in which you want to apply the term private property to the kidney.
Thank you, sir.
Ankita? Ankita, you have a question? Kanishk?
Yes, sir. I want to comment on the categorical imperative thing which you discussed about Immanuel Kant. So there was one experiment which goes like this: that suppose a terrorist group has kept a hostage of 50 people, and they are demanding another child in exchange of that 50 people. So either the 50 people will get killed or one child will get killed. But so categorical imperative says that you cannot use humans as a means to attain something. So to even exchange that single child, will be wrong according to Immanuel Kant. But a utilitarian will argue, no, the goodness of 50 people will be valued more. So sir, what is the correct ethical stand on this? This is a very confusing experiment.
No, see, in ethics and physics are different in what way? I mean, physics, Newton's inverse square law is either true or false. Right?
Yes, sir.
Now, we may at some point in time, we may be debating it, we may be unsure, there may be a furious debate among scientists, as has happened throughout the history of physics. But we all recognize at a metaphysical level that what we are debating has an objective basis, right? There is one true answer. With ethics, there's no one true answer, obviously, it's subjective. However, that doesn't mean that, everything in ethics has to be axiomatic. Okay, we are debating a public policy question, like, we're debating the farm laws, for example. Should it be the kind of liberalization which the government tried and then retracted? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Now, that involves questions of facts, so objective issues, positive questions, but also normative questions, that what should be the objective of society. So there's no one true answer there, right, as far as the ethical dimensions of the question is concerned. Ultimately, we choices. But if somebody says that, on a public policy question of that sort, that liberalizing the agricultural market is wrong, period, or it's right, period, that it's my axiom, then that you can say, look, this can't be a fundamental ethical axiom. So you have to show me your reasoning starting from more fundamental, more universal ethical principles like categorical imperative, utilitarianism, what have you. So should organ trades be allowed or not? If somebody takes an axiomatic position, right, that I think it shouldn't be said, that's my axiom, then I think one can prod that individual to engage in a more rational discussion and say, tell me what your reasoning is. I understand if you say utilitarianism is my axiomatic ethical position. I'll find it difficult to quarrel with that. I understand if you say, Kantian, what is called deontological ethics is your starting ethical position. That's your ethical axiom. But if you, on every narrower, pointed, specific question, if you say that's my axiom, my position itself is my axiom, you don't want to derive it from more basic ethical axioms, then that's, so in other words, there's room for logical argumentation and reasoned debate, even on ethical questions. You want to keep your ethical axioms to a minimum and more basic fundamental ones. So just as in geometry, right? In geometry, like in Euclidean geometry, you start with some axioms. Are the axioms true? Are they acceptable? It's in some sense a futile debate. But what are the implications of those axioms? If you embrace the Euclidean parallel postulate axiom, what kind of theorems can you prove, like the Pythagoras theorem? Similarly, in ethics, the people who debate ethics and the philosophers, what they try to do is to keep their axioms to a minimum. Somebody will say, I buy into Kant's categorical imperative. Somebody say, I'll utilitarian. But often on the more applied questions, the debate and the reasoning is often, what is the implication of utilitarianism on this policy question? If I were an utilitarian, what would be the right thing to do? And that's not always obvious.
Okay, sir. And sir, I think the thing we do in economics, the ethical part precedes that discussion that we start off with, like utilitarian. And so I think we might go into that in some other course, I suppose.
Yeah, there's an ethics and economics course, right? I think it's a bit of I think our discipline has to pay a little more attention to welfare economics, I think.
Because all this is, I can clearly see it's all based on capitalistic ideas that we are going through, efficiency and all. Though it's a very good effort from your side to give us a very whole encompassing view of welfare and all. But still at the end, we are doing utility maximization.
In our models and technical exercises, right? But what I'm trying to do in this course is, see, you can, when you're doing some sort of analytical framework, obviously you have to make choices and assumptions. So what I'm doing in many of these topics is at the end of the analytical exercises and the theorems and the results and everything, I'm trying to step out of the box and considering other possibilities, right? Considering breaking away from that framework or examining some of the underpinnings or maybe even the unspelt assumptions of the framework. That's the best we can do, right? There's no, I mean, I can't, nobody can, like, create the final book. Right? This is the,
yes, sir.
So we can be thoughtfully engaged with the frameworks and we can do some meta discussion about the framework we're using after we have thrashed out its possibilities and its implications.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, Stuti.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, this question is related to the daycare subsidy case. So,
Mhm.
sir, as we have seen that once they have withdrawn the fine, after that also the parents were they were going late. The late arrival rate was the same. So, can we say that the reason for this is that parents took this fine as price, and once we are withdrawing that price, so we are making that thing as a free good. So they would be obviously consuming it.
After withdrawal of the price,
This, yes, after they withdraw this fine, so parents would have this notion that now this thing is a free good. So, sir, can that be the reason that the late arrival rate is still the same?
it was a free good earlier too.
But, sir, once, yeah, sir, earlier there was a kind of obligation, but once we put a fine, so parents took this thing as a price. But after that, if we are withdrawing that fine, so that will be like making that good as a free good.
See, obviously something changed, right? That's absolutely clear in the data. So the question is, can we have a good detailed understanding of what went through people's minds when they had this permanent shift in behavior, even after the price went from zero back to zero, right? Then something had changed, something had stuck. Okay. So the question is, what exactly can we really flesh it out? Can we have a good understanding of it? Some people say that, there's, and that may be kind of, that sounds close to what you're saying. Some people would say that we have two boxes in our heads. We put some things in the box that it's for buying and selling, and some other things are put in a box where it's duty or, civic duty, something, not a commercial good. And when you put a price, so before people thought of, coming on time as a duty and not something to be bought and sold. And when they slapped on a price on that thing, there was this mental accounting shift. Okay, people started looking at it as something that has to be bought and sold. So that's probably what you're saying. Yes. And now they think, oh, it's free. It is a commercial good. So it has shifted to another box in the brain. And there you suddenly, now that you're looking at it as a commercial good or service, you find the zero price very attractive and you stick to it. Yes, possible.
Thank you.
Yes. I'll tell you the Benabutir basic ideas of the explanations. Kriti?
Yeah, sir, I was just wanted to ask, is one of the reasons for all of these mysteries that you talked about, is it something related to bounded selfishness? I mean, in normal economics, we assume that people are selfish and they only care about their interest. But then when you talk about behavioral economics, they too touch upon, that people are not as selfish as you believe them to be or as we assume them to be. So maybe one of the reasons that this happens is because people inherently believe that they shouldn't benefit from such charity work.
No, obviously, the fact that more people are not coming late or were not coming late indicates to us that they were not just, selfish in the narrowest sense. So it explains that part of it. If you look at the initial observations.
So even with this, people getting paid for donating blood, ideally we would expect blood donations to rise, but they do not. I mean, more people opt for not getting paid.
Yes. So in all of these cases, the fact that people are doing stuff for free and in substantial amounts, that says that they are, they're not just, out there to maximize their income. That is clear. But what is mystifying us is the changes. It is the changes. As I said, okay, when for the group 2, there are 2 rewards they get from donating blood, right? One reward is, okay, if you're generous, you feel good about helping your fellow men and women. On top of that, you get some money. So what's the harm? Okay, so just saying that people are to some extent generous won't explain the pattern over here, the changes from one treatment to another. It will explain the fact that, none of these things are zero, they're substantial. That is explained by generosity, but not the changes. Yes? Okay,
Yeah.
I'll tell you the two stories. The last question, Rishi, and then I'll move on.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good
Sir,
afternoon.
I just wanted to know, in the daycare center, do we think that the monetary punishment that we put on as a fine, it was not enough to make people to not do the thing? I mean, if it was more, something like it was higher,
Sure.
maybe it would have induced people
Sure.
to actually get there to time.
So if you saw in the data that, the rate barely budged, then you could say, oh, you offered money, but it was too little and people didn't care for such small sums. So they more or less continued to donate at the same rate as before. But the observation is not that it fell substantially. So that is not explained by the monetary amount being small.
So sir, if we replace it like if parents are late the whole week, then their kid won't be allowed to attend for 2 days. Like
Sure.
they would be able to attend. Then there might be a different result.
Absolutely, and in some experiments, sometimes they kind of really make the stakes very large. Okay, so it's possible, and so you sometimes see that as you go from zero price to really big price, right? The so-called supply curve in that context initially has a perverse slope. At positive prices, the supply falls, as we see, but then you make the price very high. If the penalty is that $1 million, then of course people will pay attention. So eventually the supply curve starts behaving well and starts rising. But the question is, why is that perverse? That part, between $0 and $10 or whatever, $0 and $20, why is it perverse? Why is it has the wrong shape? That is a question, and that question has practical relevance because this is a field experiment. This is not a lab experiment, cooking up some silly game and putting really little amounts of money. So the fine that was imposed was a fine that was deemed to be kind of practical in that context. So yes, you're right. I mean, this is not saying that if you make the fine humongous, that you'll still have, or if you make the price humongous, you donate blood and you get 10 lakh rupees. I mean, then probably you'll get a lot of blood donation, sure. But
yes, sir.
But in either in lab experiments or in field actual work, who has that kind of money to offer? Yes. Okay, here's Venabuterol's two stories in a nutshell, in sort of plain common language. One story is that, look, in a daycare experiment, and exactly as one of you said, I think Kriti or somebody, that people have, people, they're not purely selfish, they're not purely saints, they're somewhere in the middle. They do think about and care about others and try to balance their own needs and goals against that of others. So the parents were probably feeling bad about, imposing some cost on the staff and keeping them late. But if they were, severely backlogged in work, they'll make the choice in their own favor and come late. Now, when they're making that sort of comparison in their heads, they're thinking, well, how much is the cost that I'm imposing? Maybe the staff really want to go home, look after the kids, cook their dinner, and I'm making a huge imposition. Or maybe they anyway sit around and have tea and do some gupshup after class and anyway leave around 5:30, in which case my imposition is minimal. So they were unsure about that, and they were making some expected calculation and acting on the basis of that. And then when a little small fee is imposed, they say, oh, it must not be too valuable for them. The small penalty is a signal that they're slightly irritated that they have to look after some remaining kids. On a few days when they want to leave early, they can't. But on the whole, it's not that big a deal. The small fine indicates that. And that's why that knowledge or that perception change sticks even after the fine is withdrawn. And that's probably the reason. In the context of blood donation, you can think of another explanation, which is that We do generous things for two reasons. One is that we are generous, of course, but the second reason is that we want to appear as generous, right? We want others to think of us as generous, or even ourselves to think of ourselves as generous, right? I do something good, I help somebody, and I feel good about it. And in my own perception, I've risen a little in my own eyes, and certainly in the eyes of others who have observed that. And so when blood donation is purely voluntary, giving blood is a clear signal of generosity and public spiritedness and pro-social motives and what have you. But when they're offering money, then the signal becomes very mixed. If I donate blood in that situation, people may think I could be generous, but I could also maybe be a cheapskate, right? I'll do anything for 100 rupees. You could make me do anything. So no, people are not sure how much generosity I carry in my heart and for others. So sometimes this is called crowding out of intrinsic motivation, that I was generous and wanted to appear generous. That's why I was doing some good things and helpful things. But once the signal gets jammed, because money comes into the picture, it crowds out the pro-social motive, right? Of course, money itself is an incentive, right? What is called extrinsic motivation. But the intrinsic motivation, the generosity, the altruism that was in my heart, and my desire to appear as altruistic, that gets weakened. And if that negative effect is stronger, then overall you'll see the kind of things that you see. Okay, so obviously I failed to move on to the next topic. So let me wrap this up. Do you guys have a class? You don't have a class now.
Sir, after the lunch break, we'll have a tutorial.
Okay, so I'll again indulge you and say a bit more. But I'm close to wrapping up. Tomorrow for sure, I'm starting consumer theory, and if I don't, I promise to pay a fine to all of you. 1 second. Okay, let's come back to the issues. Okay, so, equity is, of course, very, very important in the world right now. Inequality is almost the issue of our day, yeah, and especially in the prosperous, rich nations. So let me show you a little bit of the data here. This is pre-tax income shares of the top 1%, that's the blue curve, and the top 0.1% in the US. It's a very dramatic curve, right? So all this rhetoric about the top 1% and we are the 99%, this has some basis. I mean, so if you look at this top 1% income share in GDP, if you go back to just before the Great Depression, the roaring 20s in the US, right? A period of great economic growth and progress, at the aggregate level, inequality was very high. Top 1% had 20% income share. And then after the New Deal and the Second World War and the Great Depression, many of these Western societies, they've radically altered their economies, right? They brought in welfare states, to some degree. I mean, some countries did it more, like Scandinavian countries, and some countries less, but there was a fundamental transformation almost everywhere. And that had a huge impact on the income distribution. You can look at many different measures, Gini, what have you, but you'll see the same pattern. The income share of the top 1%, look at how much it declined from around 20% pre-depression to close to 10%. Okay, that's no small change. And then we come to around 1980. Okay, and after that, it just shoots up. Same for the top 0.1%. And you can look at other things like in wealth and so on. So they have had several decades of declining inequality. Size was significant. And then the last 4 decades is increasing inequality. And now it's back to, by many indicators like this one, back to pre-1929 levels. Okay, so this is serious stuff. All right. Again, another graph, sort of similar idea. Look at the growth of, lowest 50%. What up to 1980, the various classes were growing roughly at the same rate. But look at the divergence. Yes, incomes, real incomes of the bottom half barely grew. And if you look at the top 0.1, top 0.1, we are talking of 600, 700% growth in real incomes. Overall, labor share of GDP, at least in the US, used to be, when I was doing my macro courses in graduate school, it was almost like that labor share is around 2/3 and capital share was around 1/3, and it was almost thought of as written in stone for many, many years. It hardly budged around that point. But things have been changing. So labor share by many measures have come down to about 60% of GDP, and capital share is increasing. And capital ownership, if you look at it, right, essentially the bottom 80% owns almost nothing of the capital stock. So ownership of capital is highly concentrated at the top. So anytime a bigger chunk of GDP goes to capital owners, that substantially increases inequality. But the other noteworthy thing is that within labor income, right, most people, the substantial component of their earnings is from their work, from their jobs. And within labor income, a massive divide has appeared between people with higher education, people with college degrees and non-college degrees. In the 1950s or 60s in the US, you could be just a high school diploma holder and then take some apprentice or something and go and work in a factory, for example, in the Midwest, maybe in the auto industry, maybe in the steel industry, maybe in coal mines, whatever. Maybe not coal mines, but auto industry, steel industry. And you could have a fairly middle-class life. You could have a car, a house, and not saddled with huge debts and so on. But if you look at oh no, this doesn't show it by education level. Do I have that graph? No, I don't have it here, but I can share it with you. In the last 40 years, it's the educated classes among workers have had healthy income growth. It's the non-college educated people whose incomes have stagnated and at the lowest end even declined in real terms. So massive inequality has appeared, right? So what to do about that is a big problem. I'll share with you a recent interview or conversation I did with David Green, who's a labor economist in University of British Columbia. And we were talking and discussing for about an hour about inequality as an issue and what kind of policy responses have been tried, what should be tried. So that podcast, if you will, I'll make available to you if you're interested. Now, what kind of solutions are being talked about? Things like, universal basic income, wealth tax. So in the US, after Joe Biden's win, there has been huge discussions, debates, and initiatives in Congress about increasing the tax on the wealthy. Not in the US thing, but over the last several years, universal basic income, whether every citizen gets paid some minimum amount. I like the term citizens dividend, if you will. Those have become issues. So those sort of stronger redistributive measures may tackle the inequality and reduce it. So many people would say that we need to exercise some of these options. But the very last thing I wanted to tell you about, and I'll end this topic with that, which is, suppose we control this inequality by raising taxes on capital owners, wealth taxes, give a decent universal basic income. Let's say in America, they managed to create a UBI of $1,000 per month. You can kind of live on that. You can have modest living, pay your rents, buy your food. It's possible to survive on that. It won't give you a great flashy lifestyle, but it's a minimum sustenance income for sure. Suppose we bring all of that in, or America sort of does that. Is that all? Will that solve all the problems? The main question is, will people be happy if they're financially supported but jobless? Because jobs also give us identity, pride, and community. People often make friends on their job. Their social circles consists of their colleagues and friends of their colleagues and so on. And jobs fill up their time. So if I have the government pays me 1 lakh rupees a month, but I have nothing to do. So what am I going to do with my life? Is that fulfilling? Does that? So I wanted to show you a video called The Last Ice Merchant. It's a fantastic video, in my opinion, produced by the New York Times. And that's the last thing I'll do, okay? Any questions? Shohan, you have a question?
Yes, sir. I was looking at the chart regarding the concentration of wealth among the 1% and the 0.1%.
Yeah.
So since it was US specific data, I want to ask if the decision by Nixon in 1971 to abandon the gold standard, if that had anything to do with it, since the bottom coincides around that region.
Unlikely. Gold standard is, I mean, we hardly see the trend starting around the late 70s or early 80s. So some people would say that, that was the time, the rise of Ronald Reagan in the US and Margaret Thatcher in Britain. So policies and the political environment in economic terms shifted much to the right. And some people, so lots of potential causes are debated, okay? Some people say, okay, the policies changes, but you see this curve not only to after-tax income, right? So maybe Reagan and Thatcher cut tax rates on the rich and cut social benefits, unemployment benefits, and so on. But you see the pattern also in pre-tax income, okay? And so something happened at a more deeper fundamental level. Obvious, and if you look at my conversation with David Green, we talk about various suspects. One is, of course, free trade and globalization. There was a massive liberalization of world trade over these last 40 years. And even our textbook, Heckscher-Ohlin trade theory, tells us that, yes, trade increases general prosperity, right? It makes the pie bigger, but it creates winners and losers, okay? So when a country like America, which is labor short, starts trading with a labor abundant country like China, the American wages should fall and Chinese wages should rise. So that has something to do with it. Then more recently, we have automation. Many jobs are being replaced by machines. So that is also contributing to it. So there are many suspects, okay? And the big debate going on is which is responsible to what extent. Okay, Shishir, a question?
Yes, sir. I had a doubt. I just had a question about the fact that you said that the educational qualification of a person also contributed, like it created divergence between their income gaps over the last 40 years. So could that also be correlated to the rise of tertiary sector jobs and the income share of tertiary sector jobs, especially, that has been on the rise for the last 50, 40 years too.
Yes, sure. But that is driven by underlying economic forces, right? So the US, its manufacturing sector took a big hit because after opening up to trade with China, many of the manufacturing jobs were shifted to China. China had cheap labor and decently educated skilled labor. So the share of manufacturing in American GDP shows a very sharp decline. But at the same time, America started specializing in other kinds of jobs, more jobs which require higher education, like the knowledge economy, the tech sector, right? So the Midwest, what is called the Rust Belt, this is where the big factories used to be. They went into decline because manufacturing was moving to China. But services, technology, finance, these became America's competitive advantage, and they required skilled labor. Okay, and if you look at the data, what is called the college premium, the average worker without a college degree, what is the average earnings? What is the average wage of a worker with a college degree? You look at that gap has grown significantly, right? And you can, it's not for random reasons. It's because of this structural change, to a large extent, it's because of this trade-induced structural change of the American economy from a more manufacturing economy towards a more service-oriented, high-end service-oriented tech, finance, management, etc. Yeah. Okay. So the last thing I had to show you is this video. Now I'll stop the recording.